I didn't plan anything dramatic that weekend. It was supposed to be one of those simple resets you take when work starts bleeding into your sleep. Fresh air, no signal, a couple of bad jokes, and a night under the stars, that was the whole idea. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Mark, and Meg. Jake drove. He always does, mostly because he doesn't trust anyone else behind the wheel of his aging silver Subaru. The car smelled faintly of pine air freshener and gasoline, and the back seat was buried under backpacks and a blue cooler that clicked every time we hit a bump. We left early, around 7:10 a.m. I remember because Meg complained about the time for a full 10 minutes before falling asleep against the window. The reserve we chose wasn't popular. That was the point. No marked tourist routes past a certain point, no picnic areas, just dense forest and a few unofficial trails that only locals seemed to know. Mark had found it on some obscure hiking forum, a thread last updated in 2018. Untouched, he said. Real forest. By the time we parked, the sun was already high. It was one of those clear days where everything looks sharper than usual, like someone turned up the contrast on the world. The air smelled dry, warm, with that faint resin scent from the trees. No wind. Not even a whisper. We joked a lot on the way up. Stupid things. Jake slipped once on a loose patch of dirt and blamed the treacherous terrain like he was narrating a documentary. Meg kept pointing out mushrooms we definitely shouldn't touch, and Mark insisted he knew which ones were edible, which we all ignored. The trail, if you could call it that, got narrower as we climbed. Branches brushed against our arms, leaving faint scratches. At some point we stopped talking as much, not because anything was wrong, just because the incline demanded it. You start focusing on your breathing, on where you place your feet. We reached the hilltop around noon. It wasn't a dramatic peak or anything. Just a slight clearing where the trees opened up enough to see over the canopy. Endless green stretching in every direction. No buildings, no roads. Just forest. Meg dropped her backpack first. Okay, she said, exhaling. Worth it. We stood there for a while, catching our breath. Mark took a few photos on his phone. Jake opened the cooler and handed out warm cola cans, which still somehow tasted perfect. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead and thinking how quiet it was, not empty, just still. That's when I decided to take the Panorama. I've always liked those wide shots, even if they never look as good later as they do in the moment. I stepped a little ahead of the group, turned on the camera, and switched to panorama mode. The screen showed that thin guiding line, the arrow telling me how to move. Don't move, I said over my shoulder. I'm getting all of you in this. Make me look taller, Jake replied. Impossible, Meg said immediately. I started from the left. The phone buzzed slightly as it began stitching the image. The forest slid across the screen in a slow, continuous motion. Trees, sunlight breaking through branches, patches of shadow. My hands were steady, but the phone lagged just a little, nothing unusual, just that tiny delay you sometimes get when it's processing too much at once. I remember that clearly. The lag. Not freezing, just dragging. Like it didn't want to keep up. I adjusted my pace, moving slower. The guiding arrow dipped for a second, then corrected itself. The screen blurred slightly in places where I moved too fast, then sharpened again as I steadied. When my friends came into frame, they were exactly where I left them. Meg stood with her hands on her hips, squinting into the sun. Mark was mid-sip from his can. Jake had turned slightly, probably about to say something. Completely normal. Completely still. I kept panning. For a moment, just a second, I thought I saw something off in the background. A darker patch between the trees, like a shape that didn't quite match the rest. But the screen stuttered again, and the image smeared as I moved past it. Hold still, I muttered, mostly to myself. The arrow reached the end of the line. The phone vibrated softly, signaling the panorama was complete. I lowered the phone and blinked, letting my eyes adjust back to the actual view. Everything looked exactly the same as before. Trees, sunlight, my friends standing where they were. Got it? Mark asked. Yeah, I said, slipping the phone into my pocket without checking. Probably came out decent. We didn't think about it again. Not then. By the time it got dark, none of us were thinking about photos. We set up camp in a small clearing about 15 minutes down from the hilltop. It wasn't anything special, just a patch of relatively even ground surrounded by dense trees, but it was good enough. Jake and Mark handled the tent while Meg and I gathered dry branches. The forest changed when the sun dropped. Not in any dramatic way. Just dimmer, heavier. The air cooled fast, and that resin smell got sharper, almost bitter. We lit the fire around 8:40 p.m. I remember checking the time because my phone still had a weak signal then, 1 bar, flickering. It disappeared completely about 10 minutes later. The fire helped. There's something about sitting around a campfire that makes everything feel smaller, contained. The dark stays at the edges. You hear it, but it doesn't feel close. We ate badly cooked sausages and bread that had already gone a bit stale. Mark told some long, pointless story about a guy he knew who got lost in the mountains for 2 days and survived on chocolate bars and melted snow. Meg laughed too loudly at parts that weren't funny. Jake kept poking the fire like it had personally offended him. It was normal. Completely normal. At some point, must have been close to 10, I remembered the panorama. I don't know why. It just popped into my head, like a loose thread. Wait, I said, reaching for my phone. That photo from earlier, I didn't even check it. No way it's good, Jake said immediately. Your hands were shaking. They weren't. They were. I ignored him and opened the gallery. The screen lit up my face, bright against the dark. I found the panorama, wide thumbnail, stretched and slightly curved at the edges like they always are. Tapped it. It opened slowly. Again, that slight delay. The same kind I noticed earlier on the hill. Show us, Meg said, leaning closer. I zoomed out so it would fit across the screen. The image looked fine at first glance. Trees, sky, the clearing. The colors were a bit washed out, but that's normal for panoramas. Then I zoomed in on us. There, I said. Not bad, actually. Jake snorted. I look like I'm about to fall over. You always look like that, Mark said. Meg laughed. I smiled, but I wasn't really listening anymore. Something felt off. Not wrong, just off. I started counting. I don't know why I did that either. It wasn't a conscious decision. Just one of those automatic things your brain does when it tries to make sense of an image. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was us. Me, Jake, Mark, Meg. 4. I zoomed out slightly, dragging the image to the left. And then I kept counting. 5. I frowned. 6. Wait, I said quietly. 7. 8. 9. Hold on. 10. 11. 12. My thumb stopped moving. 13. 14. 15. 16. I stared at the screen. That's weird, I muttered. What? Meg asked. I didn't answer right away. I just zoomed out more, then back in, trying to see the whole thing clearly. Guys, I said. Come here. They leaned in, their faces lit by the cold glow of the phone. What am I looking at? Jake asked. How many people do you see? He squinted. 4. Us. No, I said, shaking my head. Count again. Slowly. He sighed, but did it. I watched his eyes move across the image, left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4. He mumbled. Then he stopped. A pause. What? Exactly. Mark leaned in, pushing Jake slightly aside. Let me see. He started counting 2, under his breath. 10, 11. Another pause. 16. He looked up at me. That's not right. No, I said. It's not. Meg finally spoke. Where? I zoomed in on the background, just behind where we were standing in the photo. That's where they are. At first she didn't react. Then she leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. Oh, she said. It wasn't fear. Not yet. More like confusion. In the image, behind us, deeper in the trees, there were shapes. People-shaped. Blurry, stretched slightly, like the camera couldn't quite decide what they were. But still clearly figures. Standing upright. Facing the same direction as us. Okay, Jake said after a second. That's just the panorama glitching. It stitches multiple frames together. If something moves, or if you move weird, it duplicates things. Happens all the time. 16 people. Mark asked. Why not? It's just an algorithm messing up. I looked back at the screen. They didn't look like duplicates. They were two-placed. Not random. Not smeared across the image like a typical glitch. They stood in a loose line behind us, spaced out between the trees. Some further back, some closer. All facing forward. Maybe it picked up shadows or something, Meg said, but her voice was quieter now. Or branches, Jake added quickly. Pareidolia. You're seeing faces where there aren't any. I zoomed in further. The image pixelated, but the shape stayed. Not branches. Not shadows. People. 12 extra, I said. There are 12 of them. Plus us. 16 total. No one spoke for a moment. The fire crackled behind us, louder than before. Or maybe I was just noticing it more. It's just a bad photo, Jake said finally. Delete it. I didn't. Instead, I locked the screen. But I didn't put the phone away. I just held it there, in my hand, staring at my own reflection faintly visible on the black glass. Because even without the image in front of me, I could still see them. Standing there. Behind us. I should have deleted it. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head, not the photo itself, not what came after, just that one simple decision. Jake said it like it was nothing. Delete it. Like clearing a bad shot would somehow reset the moment. But I didn't. We tried to move on. That's what people do when something doesn't fit, label it, dismiss it, step around it like it's a crack in the pavement. Mark started another story, louder this time. Meg forced a laugh. Jake opened another can and made a show of it, like the sound would cut through whatever mood had settled. It almost worked. For maybe 10 minutes. Then I unlocked my phone again. I told myself I just wanted to prove it was nothing. That I'd zoom in, see the stitching errors clearly, point them out, and we'd all relax. That's what I believed, or at least what I tried to believe. The screen came alive again, cold and too bright against the firelight. I opened the panorama. It took a second longer this time. That same delay. That same slight resistance, like the phone was thinking harder than it should. Still on that? Jake muttered. Just a second, I said. I zoomed in. Not on us this time. On them. The first figure I focused on was the furthest one to the left, barely visible between two trees. It was the most blurred, almost dissolving into the background. You could mistake it for a shadow if you didn't look directly at it. But I did. It had shoulders. A head. The proportions were wrong, too stretched vertically, but still human enough that your brain locked onto it immediately. I dragged the image slowly to the right. The second figure was clearer. The third even more. Each figure was sharper than the last, not by much, just enough that you noticed the progression. Like the camera had more time to register them. More detail. By the fifth, I could make out arms. By the seventh, I could see the angle of a head, slightly tilted, as if it had been watching something. "Okay, that's creepy," Meg said quietly. "Still just the panorama," Jake replied, but he didn't sound as sure. I didn't stop. I moved further right. The eighth figure stood closer than the others. Not in the deep background anymore, just behind the line where we had been standing. The ninth was closer still. My throat felt dry. "Why are they getting closer?" Mark asked. I didn't answer. Because he was right. They weren't randomly scattered. They formed a line. A path, from deep in the forest, to us. I zoomed in more. The 10th figure stood almost directly behind where Meg had been. Its shape overlapped slightly with her outline, like the camera had tried to place them in the same space. Its arms were raised. Not fully. Just slightly bent, like it had been about to mirror her stance. "Turn it off," Meg said. The 11th figure stood right behind Mark. Clear enough now that I could see clothing, at least, something that resembled it. Dark, indistinct, like fabric without texture. And then the 12th. My thumb stopped moving. It was right behind me. Closer than any of the others. Too close. Maybe a meter away. Less. Its arm was extended forward. Reaching. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Zoom in," Jake said, but his voice was different now. "Lower." I did. The image broke into pixels, but the shape held. The arm. The hand. Too long, not stretched like a glitch, long like it had been that way to begin with. And the face, I leaned closer to the screen without realizing it. There wasn't one. Not really. Where the face should have been, there was a dark patch. Not empty, just wrong. Like a shadow that didn't belong to anything. It wasn't flat. It curved inward. Like an opening. I pulled the phone back instinctively. "That's enough," Jake said sharply. But something clicked. I dragged the image back to the left, faster this time, then slowly again, retracing the line from the first figure to the last. "They're copying us," I said. "What?" Mark asked. "Look at their positions." I zoomed out just enough to include both us and them in the same frame. Meg. Hands on hips. She looked at the screen, then at me. "Yeah. Now look behind you in the photo." She did. A pause. Oh. Behind her in the image, one of the figures stood in almost the exact same stance. Slightly off, distorted, but unmistakably similar. "Mark," I said. "Your arm." He glanced down at the photo. The figure behind him mirrored the angle. "Jake," I said. "I see it," he cut me off. His voice was tight. We all looked at the screen. 4 of us. And behind us, 12 reflections. Not perfect. Not exact. But close enough that it felt intentional. Deliberate. Like someone had watched us for just long enough to imitate. The fire cracked loudly, sending a burst of sparks into the air. Meg flinched. Okay, she said, standing up. I don't like this anymore. I didn't want to say the next part. But I'd already seen it. As I moved across the image again, slowly, carefully, the figures didn't just get clearer. They got closer. Not just in position. In scale. In presence. The first one was small, distant. The last one loomed. Like it didn't belong to the same space as the rest of the image. Like it had stepped forward. Out of it. I locked the screen again. My hand was shaking slightly, enough that I noticed. No one spoke. The forest around us felt tighter. The dark between the trees no longer looked like empty space. It looked occupied. I'm telling you, Jake said finally, forcing the words out. It's just the algorithm. It stitched something wrong. That's all. No one argued. But no one agreed either. I stared at the black screen of my phone. And for a second I thought I saw movement in the reflection. Not on the photo. Behind me. After that, nobody really talked normally anymore. We tried, at first. Jake kept insisting it was a processing error, like repeating it enough times would make it true. Mark nodded along but didn't add anything. Meg just sat closer to the fire than before, staring into it. But the forest had changed. Not visually. Acoustically. At some point I noticed the birds were gone. It wasn't sudden, more like the gradual removal of something you only realize you needed when it's no longer there. Earlier in the evening there had been distant calls, small rustles, insects shifting through grass. Now there was only the fire and us. Even the wind had stopped. I checked my phone. No signal. The time was 11:17 p.m. We should probably sleep, I said eventually. No one moved. I leaned back slightly and closed my eyes. That's when I heard it. A sound from the edge of the clearing. Not loud. Not even distinct at first. Just wrong. Like fabric dragging lightly against bark. I opened my eyes. Nothing there. Just trees. Dark trunks standing too still. Did you hear that? I asked. No, Jake said immediately. Mark hesitated. Maybe an animal. Meg shook her head slowly. No animals are this quiet. We all went silent. The fire snapped. Another sound. Closer this time. Not movement through leaves, something heavier. Like a footstep that didn't want to commit to being a footstep. I stood up. Then my phone buzzed. A single vibration in my pocket. We all froze. I didn't get a notification, I said slowly. I took it out. The screen was on. I didn't remember unlocking it. It was open on the panorama. The image had changed. Not much, at first glance it looked the same. Same forest, same group of us. But the framing was tighter. Closer. And the figures were no longer spread out. They stood almost shoulder to shoulder. The line behind us was gone. They weren't behind us anymore. They were around us. I'm deleting it, I said immediately. My thumb went to the button. The screen flickered, just once, a brief distortion, and in that flicker the figures turned their heads. Not all at once. One after another, slowly. Like they were noticing something. Like they were noticing us noticing them. The screen changed again. A complete ring. We were inside it. No longer a line behind us, a full formation around the fire. 13 shapes. 12 of them were not us. Count them, Jake said, voice cracking slightly on the last word. I did. 13. That's impossible, Mark said. There are 4 of us. 13 in total, I said. Then I stopped. Because one of them, one of the figures in the image, was wearing my jacket. Same color, same folds, same zipper line. And it was standing exactly where I was standing. Except I wasn't in the image. Not clearly. Not as a separate figure. I zoomed in on that spot. The shape blurred. Then sharpened. Then showed me, standing in the circle, holding a phone, looking down at it. Even though I was holding the phone right now. In my own hand. In real time. I felt something cold touch my wrist. Not a grab. Not pressure. Just contact. Like someone had placed their fingers there to make sure I didn't move. I didn't look down. I couldn't. The fire crackled behind us, but it sounded further away now. Mark said something, I think my name, but it felt distant, like it was coming through water. I tried to drop the phone. My fingers didn't respond the way they should have. They were still wrapped around it, still tight, like the decision to hold it was no longer entirely mine. The cold on my wrist didn't let go. It wasn't pain. Not pressure. Just contact, patient and complete, like something reminding me where I ended and where I didn't. Stop looking at it, Mark said sharply. I tried. I lifted my eyes from the phone. But I still saw it, not visually, just present, like the image had stopped being inside the device and started being layered over everything around me. The fire crackled again, except now it didn't sound like fire. It sounded like something breathing through broken wood. My wrist went colder. Not suddenly, gradually, like warmth being taken away in steps. Then on the screen, one line of text appeared directly over the image, no notification sound, just words. Focus error, too many subjects. A pause. Then, recalibrating. Jake grabbed my shoulder hard. Put it down, he said, voice shaking. I can't, I said. And I meant it. The screen brightened, too bright, and the forest around us dimmed in response, like it was being pushed back. The circle in the image tightened. No gaps between figures anymore. Only continuous presence. Then the figure standing where I stood, the one in my jacket, moved its arm. Slowly. Deliberately. It pointed outward. Not at the other figures, not at the circle. At the edge of the frame. At something beyond the camera view. Meg made a sound that cut off halfway. I finally looked up from the screen. And when I did, I saw them. Not as figures in a photograph. Not as shapes between trees. As presence at the edge of the clearing, close enough that distance had stopped meaning anything. Jake wasn't looking at me. He was looking slightly above me, like he was seeing something I wasn't fully aligned with yet. The phone vibrated one last time. Long sustained. Like it had found the final lock. The screen turned white. Completely white. Then slowly an image returned, not the forest, not the circle. Just a single frame. A photograph taken from my perspective. Of me standing in the clearing, holding the phone, looking down at it. And behind me, everyone. All of them. Including me. But the version of me in the photo was looking up. Directly at the camera. Smiling. I felt something cold close around my fingers. Not tighter. Just complete. Like the hand had finished deciding it was there. I didn't drop the phone. Because I understood something in that moment that I probably shouldn't have. As long as I'm looking at them through it, they don't look away. I still have the photo. I know I should delete it. I've tried 3 times. Twice the app crashed before it finished. The 3rd time it seemed to work, the thumbnail disappeared, the storage freed up, but that night when I plugged my phone into my laptop, there it was in the backup folder. Still there. Timestamp updated. File size incrementally larger than before. The last thing I can say for certain is that the image hasn't stopped changing. I don't open it anymore. But I can see the file size ticking up in the background every few hours, in small, irregular increments, like something is still being added. I don't know what it's adding. I don't know what it's counting. And I've decided I'm not going to look to find out. But every time I pick up my phone now, to check the time, to text someone, to do anything normal, I feel it. That same slight lag. That same tiny delay, like it's processing too much at once. Like there are too many subjects in the frame.